Buddy, we are officially live. I'm so excited to kick off another pre-symposium panel. This is the lead up to our executive symposium on April 17th in 2 days in Houston on the topic building a clear vision that drives execution. Essentially, in our pre-symposium panels, what we do is we bring attendees of the executive symposium together to share their insights, their perspectives, things that they found to be effective when it comes to building a clear vision that drives execution, and maybe some mistakes we've made along the way too, because we know that no one wants to read the Bill Gates How I Became a Billionaire by Trying Hard book. We want to know, like, okay, cool, where did you face plant? What did you learn from it? How did you go about working through those challenges? They make tangible insights that make us better as leaders. Anyways, we've got Kristy, we've got David, we've got Dan here today to share their perspectives and insights on how to building a clear vision that drives execution. Kristy, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Kristy Wills. I am a regional manager with MidFirst Bank. I've been in leadership for 24 years.
Very cool. David, how about you?
Yeah, David Zahn. I'm managing director of a company called Velocient. We are a Latin American outsourcing company. Held leadership positions at a bunch of software companies, primarily startup and growth stage companies, and have a long list of failures in my background that hopefully have provided some good lessons.
Good, I like it. And Dan, how about you?
Yeah, Dan Durkin, Managing Director of Technology for Yes Prep Public Schools, 27 schools, 20,000 students here in the Houston area, getting kids into college. Happy to be here.
Very nice. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is by putting together executive symposiums. So let's dive in. Building a clear vision that drives execution. So I think one of the reasons why I specifically use the term clear in the topic is because I think so often a lot of organizations have very corporate-y vision statements or very general and vague vision statements. And I think oftentimes it creates a disservice to any new initiative that's going on. I think with a lot of the economic changes that we're seeing right now, we are seeing a lot of organizations make pivots, change management, mergers, acquisitions. Just a lot of change is going on right now in the industry. And I think it forces us as leaders to really reevaluate our vision statements and really look at it and say, you know what, is this clear enough? So the first question that I have for you all is, when it comes to your organization's vision statement, do you feel like it does a good job of creating the clarity as to what the next steps forward are? And if not, and you don't necessarily have to state for your vision statement, but maybe for other organizations where you maybe feel like they're a little general, what can a leader within the organization do to reevaluate that vision statement and be able to craft it in a way that prepares the organization to move forward in whatever direction they're moving? When this, by the way, doesn't necessarily be for the whole business. It could be for some new department that you're creating, or some new initiative that you're trying, or some new business transformation that you're trying to achieve, whatever it may be. How do you go about stimulating the vision process? Because sometimes I feel like that step gets overlooked. Sometimes I feel like it's kind of like kicked down the curb, and then all of a sudden we have not taken an intentional approach about our culture or our vision or what's going on. And then we're like, oh my God, we have all these issues. So anyways, I'll stop talking. That's the first question. Who wants to jump in and start answering it? I know it's a pretty loaded question.
I'll start.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually don't love vision statements very much. I mean, you have to have one because there are people in your company who need to understand what the North Star is for your company, and I get that, and you need to put one together. But sometimes companies spend an inordinate amount of time coming up with a vision statement, and they're crafting every single noun and verb, and I think at some point you just got to move on. Look, I come from the startup world. And where you're going one day is not where you're going the next. So you can't spend a lot of time on the vision statement. I think the important things, the thing that I probably emphasize more is the translation to execution. Because in my world, you have to fail fast, and you have to fail very fast so you can get to the next pivot, get to the next thing that ultimately is the right market fit. And if you're spending time in a room on a whiteboard, talking about vision statements, it's just not going to, I think, be all that fruitful after a while. Values to me are a lot more interesting. What do you value as a company? What do you value in your people? Those are the folks. Those are things you have to get right, because you're going to bring people in who fit those values.
Kristy, Dan, what are your thoughts?
I'd follow up with that. So I agree and disagree. I agree that a vision statement is actually something that's very powerful in an organization because we need to have a vision on where we plan to go. And I do agree with you, David, too, with it changes because vision statements, anytime I've ever worked in an organization, sometimes we do have a vision statement and we introduce it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't change down the road, right? And a lot of times the reason why it does change is because, and it's for the right reasons, is we listen to our people. And so we listen to the people and get the feedback from them. And sometimes that vision statement changes based on that get a better understanding of that vision.
Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, a vision statement, mission statement, it has to have those values. It has to have those business objectives in it, or the fluff is kind of wasted. But, sometimes the language is really what brings the people in, the right people or the donors, the revenue. They're going to tie into that two sentences that you have to position yourself in the market and to set yourself apart. So I'd say the vision is very important for a lot of different reasons. And so you are trying to tie a lot of things into that. But I also would agree that your business objectives, your OKRs, your however you're going to get structure into your direction needs to tie into that vision, or people start misinterpreting it real quick.
Yeah, there's a crude term in the technology world, which is called polishing the turd. You
Mm.
can keep polishing the turd, but in the end, it's still a turd. And so I think I've been in companies where, man, we spent just crazy amount of time, months trying to get the vision statement just right, arguing about single words. Then you're in the wrong place. You got to get moving on to the next thing, and then update it later on if there's something that's changed in your business. That's fine.
No, I like that. I think that makes a ton of sense. David, in smaller organizations, I think it's easier to make those adjustments to the vision statement because when you're in a smaller organization, it's really easy to make a nimble change. But when you're in a behemoth organization with tens of thousands of employees, potentially changing your vision statement or even changing the direction of where the business is going can have a jarring effect on other people that you just maybe never accounted for, where you're like, I thought we were all good with rowing in a slightly different direction. And then you get some people out here, you're like, I didn't even know that business unit worked for us, that are like, whoa, 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 what are we doing here? But to your point, I do think execution is the most critical part of all of this because ultimately, if what we're laying out takes forever because we're, paralyzed by an analysis, we're never going to actually make the steps forward to actually do the things we're trying to achieve. And I think that notion of execution is also probably the other most important word in this topic of building a clear vision that drives execution, is because we don't execute, we're not doing anything. And so I guess maybe another question that I'd love to ask to follow up on that is, when we're in a scenario where we are noticing change needs to occur, how can we go about making adjustments to that pivot, making adjustments, iterations, whatever we want to call it, in a way that is minimally jarring, but at the same time allowing us to gather the insight to know if this truly is the direction we want to commit to?
What's wrong with jarring? That
Well,
sounds okay sometimes. That
tell
depends
me
on
more.
depends on your change, right? If it's a small change, I think you can organizationally go pull something off, right? If it's a large change, if it's a pivot or a minor pivot of some sort, that can be massively jarring. But I think that could be great, right? Because if you come out the other end, you might be in the place you need to go be. But there's so many things that have to align. Do you have the right people in place? Because you probably hired for some prior vision. If you have a new direction you're going, do you have the right people who are actually going to go off there and achieve that? Um, I think a mistake a lot of leaders make sometimes too is you just introduce change. You ask people to go do something, but they have day jobs. They have things they're trying to get done. They're probably already underwater on the stuff they're trying to get done. To ask them to go do one more thing, you're likely to fail at that. Maybe not because of them, but because you didn't actually set this thing up the right way. So I often talk about organizing around an outcome, and unless you organize around an outcome, it's unlikely you're actually going to go hit that. I think that's one of the things from an execution perspective a lot of leaders miss. They just keep dumping onto the team and say, go do this. And it doesn't usually work out.
So I would add a flavor of sustainable change versus like a minor change. Like if you're looking at long-term sustainable change, you've got to have the skills, the incentives, the resources, the action plan. You're changing the engine of what the operations are. And if you're looking at 5 and 10 year type models, there's a lot to that change that you're asking, right? So it can't just unwind real quick without things falling apart. So I would add that like not just the clarity of what you're trying to do, but look at the pressure points and look for the feedback to tell you where the pressure points are failing. Because if people are confused, that means your vision didn't have clarity. If people have anxiety, it means you didn't have the skills necessary for that change. If people are resistant, it's because they didn't have the incentive and they weren't on board to begin with, right? If they're frustrated, that means they don't feel like they have enough resources to be successful, right? And if you're getting that treadmill, then it wasn't really a good action plan. They weren't able to get through that problem that you didn't anticipate, right? Maybe a supply chain issue or things like that. So I'd say if you're talking about a larger sustainable change, you need to have cohesion between what you're executing and how it hits that direction, that business objective, that thing you were hoping to accomplish on the other side of the circle, as well as the transformational change, right? So operational excellence is a big thing in bigger companies because it takes a long time to get there. And it's very much like parallel parking a battleship, right? Like it's just a series of minor directions to move such a large vehicle. But very powerful once you get it moving, right?
Chris,
Go
any
ahead.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Dan. It's about the people, and if as long as you have the plan in place and you have a clear objective and people are on board and understand and not overwhelming, like David said earlier about throwing more at them and throwing more at them, but I don't look at it as more as necessarily throwing more at them. Communicating and make sure that the day to day actually goes with what your plan is for the organization.
Hmm. I like what all of you are saying. I really like the different angles we're coming at it, and I love the analogy of parallel parking a battleship. I'm just visualizing what that could look like, and I think it's very funny. But David, to your point, you bring up a really interesting point that I want to elaborate on because Chris, you both kind of talked about it from both sides of the coin. David, you brought up the really important point of prioritizing the work, but also organizing around the outcome. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, what so often organizations do, especially CEOs, and I know I've certainly been guilty of it, and I'm sure all of you all have been guilty of the classic, it would be really cool if we could do X. It would be so cool if we could go out and make Y happen. And your team hears it and you're like tomorrow, or it would be cool if we could make that happen, or like in 5 years from now. Like what is the timeline for these sorts of things, and what is the prioritization order? And I think a lot of leaders neglect to put a timeline on those ideas that they have for one, fear of looking like they're lazy or lackadaisical around a change initiative if they put the timeline out way too far into the future, or uh not conscientious of what's on everybody's plate if they say, hey, we need to get this done by the end of next week. How does that look to y'all? And so we're not giving people the great, and it's okay if something needs to be done by next week, but we also need to take whatever's on everybody else's plate off their plate so then they can fully focus on and not be like, hey, do everything you're doing. Don't like change any of that, but also add this on there too. You're cool for working on the weekends and in evenings and early mornings, right?
Yeah.
I'm being silly.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're to keep this war analogy going. You're trying to win the war, not every battle, right? And so I think as a leader, you got to figure that out. Not everything has to be urgent, but there are some things that are urgent. And so yes, you need to put deadlines, milestones, maybe phase gate it so that you know that you're still doing the right thing. Those are important. But you need to have the carrot there too. You need to have the incentive at the end. If somebody does a great job, or you get the outcome you want, or an outcome that you didn't expect, but it's still good, then all the glory should go upon the people that did the work too. And then guess what? The next time you go do something like that again, you've got people buying in a lot more quickly on change because very few people like to go through change. People don't like turmoil. They like to have some expectation that things are going to go the way they expect each and every day. And sometimes you gotta force that through your organization, but you got to do it in certain ways that I think they're brought along, on that process.
But to your point, into this whole kind of concept of like when things are urgent, how do we pull things off of people's plate? When things are not as urgent, how do we make sure we keep it in time? Like, is how do we as leaders get the self-awareness to know when someone's overextended? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I guess overextension is actually okay sometimes. Sometimes you have to go the extra effort back to winning the war, but not every battle can go exactly like that. I think there's a conversation that has to happen. My perception of what's on somebody's plate might be very different than what's actually happening. The people who work for me that I probably work well with or the best with are the ones that push back and say, "All right, Zahn, I love that you have this new idea that just popped in your head yesterday, and I think it's interesting. I'm willing to go pursue it, but I've got these other 5 priorities on my plate. Well, how do they rank against what you want?" And when those guys have those conversations with me, then we're having the right conversation, and then I might back off, go on to the next thing that pops in my head, or we might decide to drop something from that list because this is more important than anything else we're going and doing. That two-way conversation, I think, is the best.
Yeah, I was going to add, when you think of like Innovation Hub, I challenge my directors to give me 10 points, 10 percentage of their time and resources for Innovation Hub. And that gives me a nice little framework of how much can I put in the pipe and how much do I need to lay over into another timeline if it's more than that 10-point ask, right? Because at that point, I'm either impacting operational excellence, right? Trade-offs that I don't necessarily want to have. I'm asking too much, or I need to find the resources to add to the resource pile in order to accommodate the difference. If it's that great of an idea, it's worth investing in. If it's not that worth of an idea, then you don't want to risk too much on it, right? And so for me, I put about 10 points unless I really believe in it, and then you're going to make a little bit of a change, add resources, shuffle the deck, what have you. So for me, that's a good rule of thumb. Kristy?
I think the biggest thing with this is that they need to know the why. We can tell people every day what needs to be done, and especially if something is suddenly we got to get this done next week. But your team needs to know the why. And that's one thing that's, of course, this never came natural with a lot of us. We just, we were leaders. And so we were there to lead and tell them, tell them what they needed to have done and tell them, the deadline it needed to be done, but not listening to them and giving them the why behind it. I have found over the years that really them understanding the why something needs to be done or why we're doing what we're doing, it gets more value out of it. And then also listening to the feedback. So, I mean, one of the big, huge things about this all is the communication, but not just communication with me, communicating to them, but them communicating to me as well and listening to their feedback. Not all feedback's going to be taken, but there's a lot of things that we learn from our people, and us as leaders, that's what we have to do is we have to listen and we have to give the why behind what the reasoning behind our plan is.
Yeah, I like both these points about people knowing the why and 10% innovation hub time. I want to put on like devil's advocate hat here on both of those points just for funsies. But 10% innovation hub time, I really like that because it gives you a barometer of like, cool, when I ask you to work on a special like, wild hair idea, 10%. It's not more than 10%, it's 10%. The question I get though is how do we know when one is someone still working on a past innovation hub time that you said 6 months ago and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that idea. Like, how do you keep track of the innovation hub time? And when there is an innovation hub, anything, is it just kind of like time out in the ether and do they have to pull back? Like, how do you manage the innovation hub time?
So that's inside your PMO. So you've got to have a good project management.
Yeah.
So project management, again, I put another framework of about 30%. Sometimes teams will be less, sometimes more, depending like infrastructure versus your data guys. They're going to do more projects. Infrastructures are going to run a little leaner, right? But as a rule of thumb, project management's going to eat about 30% of everyone's time, 5% for administrative duties, right? And then, your normal tasks. So inside that 30 is going to be that 10, if that makes sense. Right. And so that gives you kind of a good structure of how much resources and time effort. If you're going too much on one topic, either you're not very good at it, or you're being asked too much of it, or it's not a good plan, there's a failure, like something needs to be voiced. So having check-ins every couple of weeks with your PMO and having tighter lines on what those sprints, those agiles, waterfalls look like, cutting off when things aren't going well, right? And I think David talked about that as far as like know when to turn it off, right? Cut it off.
Yeah,
But there's structures in place for those things.
Chris, anything to add to that?
Just
Yeah.
no, it was funny when he said that. That was exactly was my thought process. Was it was about I can come back to communication, but that's what he was saying to check in with them. Check in with them, find out where they are, so that way when you are assigning something new or rolling out a new plan, you're not finding out they're so far behind. If we're constantly in communication with them and knowing where they're at with whatever it is that they're working with, and we won't be surprised at that whenever we do roll something out.
Yeah, and let me add something there too. I think it's interesting right now, especially, which is looking for areas of relief. Dan, you mentioned some percentage is dedicated to administrative activities, and yeah, that's everybody's life. AI should hopefully be one of those relief points for us. In my company, we introduced AI for just simple note taking, which a lot of people are doing right now, but it's increased the productivity of about 15 of my people by 50%. On a day-to-day basis. And so when you have that time back, now what can you go do? Well, if there's some change types of activities you need to go focus on, they now can go do that. If you need people to pull out of the day-to-day and be more leadership position, you can go do that, right? I think there's a lot of tools out there that are available now that can provide relief, that allows people to sort of free up and do those bigger things.
Yeah, one area I want to bring back is personal development.
Yeah.
Like go take the classes, get your learning, your skills, your soft skills, your hard skills. Like somewhere along the way with budgets, we all cut personal development. So if you get efficiencies with AI, open up the lane for more personal development, right? Take advantage of those efficiencies before just, trying to take on other numbers. That's kind of where my team is at is getting that personal development skills back up, right?
Good.
I'm in total agreement with all of you, but I think the one thing that all of these solutions require is a level of psychological safety or security or comfort with people speaking up. At the end of the day, it's easy for us at the top level of our organization to say all these things because we're at the top level of our organization. We're the boss. It's okay. Like I mean, sure, there are, whether we report to customers or a board or, whomever we report to, sure, we report to some people, but for those that report to us, we are the person that they report to. And if I'm a person who's, whether that be maybe our organization made no layoffs during this entire kind of year of weird economic situations and stuff like that. But we look around and we see what's going on with all these other organizations, and I'm thinking to myself, well, gosh, this isn't a job market I want to enter into at this juncture in time. So therefore, I want to be a team player and a yes person and say yeah to everything that comes my way and not complain because I want to show I'm a team player or not speak up when I'm feeling burned out or anything like that. But eventually, there comes to this breaking point. How do you, as the leader, kind of dig into those deeper, kind of, Dan, to your point, soft kind of skills, feelings, perspectives, how people are working, because it can be so easy for us on the executive level to be looking at it from like a 10,000 view perspective and not even be aware that, Johnny who reports to us is really burned out and is like at the end of his rope, and we have added some more things to his plate. And we thought, the work seemed relatively like, yeah, like I could do that probably pretty efficiently, like probably so could Johnny. And so we don't, David, I think you brought this up earlier. It's like easier for us to assume how long it takes for a task to get done versus how long it actually takes for that task to get done, because it's not us doing it, it's someone else doing it. And also we maybe haven't done it at all or all that much. So how do you go about like being able to decipher the things that might be going on with our team?
For me, I think it's you have to do what you preach, right? So if I'm saying cut apart your time and get organized, I have to show my team that I do the same thing. Like maybe my administrative time is a lot more than 5 points and my mix is a little bit different. But here's my routine. Am I doing my Udemy classes and getting my little fake certificate and posting it and doing my PD? Yeah, I've got to challenge myself to do that as well, right? And being a little bit vulnerable on it and saying like, hey, everybody needs to work on something. What are you working on? This is what I'm working on to better myself. What are you working on? Bring that space. And I think the other side is fun. People forget about having a little bit of fun. Like I bring the arcade games in like every quarter and have a little bit of downtime with it. Don't forget that like you've got to kind of recycle that engine a little bit. Have some outings, have some different little games or incentives and freebies. Somebody does a shout out, they get a gift card, or like at least an attaboy kind of thing on the message board. Like have a little bit of fun to kind of bring that cycle back up and down because we're all going to have stressors, but you've also got to pull that off a little bit, right? Because if it's all go, then they're either going to burn out or run away, right?
David, Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you're bringing up a point of like, how we sit as leaders and say, yeah, we want your feedback or we want you to speak up and, say your mind. And many times they don't. I feel that's on leadership. If we're not empowering them to do that, then we're not, that's when we come on and it's our fault that they're not speaking up is because we're not empowering them to do that. Just for example, just recently. So I spent a lot of time, I'm the regional manager. I spend a lot of time in the branches. Okay. I spend a lot of time with the managers. But when I'm there, it seems like when I'm there, then they'll come and they'll talk to me and they'll give me feedback. But when I'm not there in person, then I don't get that. And so I understand and I see the value of me being there. And then I took one step, further and I emailed them all and said, hey, I want to add more value while I'm at your office. And so what I want y'all to each do is really think about something I can either do for you or I can do for your team while I'm there to be able to add value so that way I am opening that door to where their team feels like they're empowered to be able to speak up about how they're feeling or what their thoughts are on different things within the organization. But I have to put myself and I have to be present. I can't just be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, that word empowerment gets thrown around a lot. It's a hard word for me to get my head around. There's a couple things we do. I guess we bring people in who already know they're empowered. Like I don't have to give empowerment to anybody. What I have to create a space for that to actually show. And we do that in a number of ways. My business partner and I, we forget, we're executives and we forget sometimes that's intimidating. Sometimes I guess for people earlier in their career. So my business partner, we actually on large calls give each other shit. He's bald, I'm a vegetarian, and we just go at each other. And when people see that we're being, like that with each other, they start to see that they got permission to be like that with us. They can speak their mind, they can give us crap, they can disagree. And if you can create the space for it, as long as you have people who will chirp up, you brought them in because that's how they're built. I think you can get there. But if they come in and they're just not the kinds who are ever going to raise their hand, I can't empower them. And if I do, it's going to take forever and a day, and it's just still not going to be quite enough. You got to have people come in and think are ready to take that
So
personally.
think of it this way, just feedback on that.
Yeah,
Empowerment, yeah, it is a word that's thrown around, but it's something, it's a belief that I have. I feel like I have to empower my people. When I hire
sure.
people to come into an organization, they are empowered, and that's why I've hired them, is because they're very strong people that
Yeah,
I feel are very empowered and very going to give me feedback and things like that. But you have to remember when you come into an organization, you don't really know 100% what the expectation is until you actually get into the role. And that's when sometimes we lose them. And so our
yeah.
job as leaders is to keep them empowered. So yes, they do come in strong and empowered, but my job as a leader is to keep them that way. So that's why I use that word when I say that, because I want to keep them that way, not necessarily get them that way. They come that way.
Yeah, no, fair, absolutely. If they don't come that way, then you're just it's too big of a hill to climb. Yeah, for sure.
This is really interesting. By the way, I love it. I'm in total agreement. I do think empowerment is a buzzword that is thrown around way too much, especially from the executive team, because it's like culture. It's like someone advocating for their own culture. It's like a nickname. You can't give it to yourself. It's for other people to decipher for you. And so when we say as the executives that people are empowered, I will say this, it's not our call to make, it's their call to make in a setting where we're not there. When they go back to their family, do they say to their family, I feel empowered at this workplace? I think that could be a good litmus test for whether or not people actually feel empowered, which is hard to grab because, the family wants you to keep your job as anyways too. But that's like, I don't know, that's my high level idea. David, your concept of you and your partner giving each other shit is a very hilarious and fascinating way of creating that space. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it because I can envision that the one day where that new employee comes in and says something to your partner or says something to you about something, and you're like, whoa, 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 we don't talk about that. Whoa, you crossed the line.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
No,
But
we're startup culture, and
sure.
it's a little bit looser. And I think some of the things you find with maybe with bigger companies, which are a little bit more buttoned up, you don't really find so much in the startup culture. But no, but it does sort of open. What we find is that yeah, they come in sort of stiff, and they're like, wow, or if they're especially in their 20s, they're starting their career out, they really don't know what's what, and they start to figure out, oh, there's a way for me to have a voice in this and to actually influence the direction of this company, and that's amazing for them. People who join our company stick around for a very long time. We don't lose a lot of people because this is the culture where you actually have a voice and you can do something really interesting and grow your career. So, and we have to create that space. So again, I don't want people thinking that my business partner up here in high and everything we say is like the word of God. That's ridiculous. We make mistakes every day. I need somebody to call out those mistakes so that I can, course correct, or we can all course correct and do the right thing. So it doesn't work if I don't have people who aren't willing to chirp up. So
No.
they figure it out. If they don't figure it out, then we hired poorly, basically.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I find it funny. I would to be a fly on the wall in that one time where that one person says that one thing that does cross the line where you're like, ooh,
It
like
happens.
John is really insecure about the fact that he just joined Ozempic and he's lost some weight and he's been trying to diet for years and couldn't lose the weight and now he has. And so like, don't bring up that he's on the yo type of thing. I'm being silly. I'm not saying there. I'm not saying anything
Yeah.
about Ozempic or anything. I'm just saying if there's something where someone's actually insecure about a thing, they cross
It's
the line.
okay. It's okay. It gets called out at some point. At least
Sure, yeah.
my business partner, right? Yeah, we're secure enough in our own selves to where it's okay. You can call
Yeah.
out our shit. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Kristy, you brought up this point before about people knowing the why. I want to bring on my devil's advocate hat for that notion because I think it's interesting because I think sometimes it goes beyond just people knowing the why from your perspective, but what's the why from their perspective? Because the why can be very different. The what's in it for me, for why I'm making this change in the way I'm behaving versus like why has the business made this change? And I think by the way, both are really critical because if I'm looking at this and let's say an organization made a reduction in force of 5% of the staff and I'm thinking to myself, okay, why am I left? Do I have some survivor skill? Like, what's gonna, cause me to stay around here? The organization. I need to know why the organizational changes were made because then I can say, like, okay, cool. I see myself growing and thriving in this role because I bring X value back to the organization, and that makes sense. But also, what's in it for me too? How do you go about communicating that why, both from not only the business perspective, but also the what's in it for me perspective from the individual employee?
Knowing your people. So when I say know the why behind it, I want them to know more of the why behind it, not really for my benefit, but for their benefit. Because if I can't get their buy-in on the why and they don't understand the why and it's just my perspective or our organization's perspective and they're just doing it because I told them this is why, it's not going to get them there. But if I know the person on a level to where I know what is important to them, then I can explain and find the why because there's a different why for everything. There's a why for each person on why they do what they do. Like you said, some people say, oh yeah, I go home and I feel empowered. And some people, and the family's just like, just keep your job, well, maybe some of it's that. Maybe their why is that they just want to stay employed. And then some people's why is that they want to grow and they want to get to that next level. So knowing their why is going to be able to help you to explain your why.
Dan, David, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry. Sorry, was that Dan or David?
Either one. Yeah.
Oh,
And David, what are your thoughts on that? It was an open-ended.
very good, Dan.
Jump in, Dan.
So I'd like to correlate just to what Chrissy's talking about as far as the personal side as well as the value to the org. So is it a skill? Is it an attribute? Why we retained you after this reduction in force? Call it out and say, we love having you here because of this attribute that you bring to the table, this skill that you add, your resource, your ability to output maybe exceeds what other people could, or it's just the potential with the direction that we're going that this is going to be a good fit in the future. Maybe we don't have the role defined the way we do, but we know you're the right player that's going to make us successful in this space. So tying them into that why of where their value is going to be perceived is going to give them that hook back into the company as to why they're there, right? And I think that's very important for people to have purpose and to have intentional direction. If you don't have purpose, then you're eating a paycheck and you're waiting for an opportunity because you don't have a specific no to it. But if you have intentionality and purpose, people will build mountains or they'll clear through them for you. Like you won't have the problems you think you have if you get people with intentionality and purpose behind it. So those would be the two words I would kind of drive in there is be specific, intentional, and purposeful with why you did it and where you want to go. You don't have to be specific on what you're going to achieve, like you want 93.2%, but you need better than 90. Or, right, you can have some generality to let innovation kind of breed from that scarcity. But yeah, I think that's important. If you can bring people in and across different teams, you can really pave a different kind of direction.
Yeah, I'll throw two other logs in that on those fires. Passion. We interview for passion. So whether you're a software developer, technologist, or even a recruiter in our team, what are you passionate about? It doesn't have to be about the job. What do if you enjoy bird watching and you go on trips just to do that? Oh, it's awesome. Let's have a conversation about that. If you have passion about something, then you're a passionate person, and I want you in my organization because later on, when we have something else to go do, you can pour that passion into that. We can probably be more successful at the end. So I think it's that to that intentionality that Dan you're talking about. The other thing I would add to this, a slightly different point is, like I find humans baffling, frankly, and I can't always figure out what motivates them, why they do what they do. So one of the things I've learned very well, somewhere in my career was to surround myself with people who are much better at tapping into those things and figuring that out. Because it's not just me for sure. There's a team of leaders that has to go and get something out of this organization. And so I've got good people in my company today that actually understand at an individual level what people are passionate about, what motivates them, can help explain the why to them, can connect those. I think that's massively important, absolutely. Because it doesn't always have to come from me. It has to come from others too in the organization who are way better and maybe translating that than I am at times.
I like it. I like all those points. Dan, I really like your point about calling out somebody's superpower. There's a book by a woman named Liz Weissman called Multipliers, where she talks about like calling out what someone else's superpower is. This concept of like presupposing the skill set that maybe someone doesn't see in themselves allows them to reinforce that. Um, but I also think it's not a one-time iteration because I can envision, the CEO going up to that one employee 20 years ago and being like, "Hey, we just enacted a bunch of IT. You're the person who knows how to click send on the fax machine, baby. You have got a ton of value to this team. You are the fax person." And now, 20 years later, there's still that fax person. They're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what happened to all this, fax machine 1 in a million talk here? I know how to work it." And they're like, "Yeah, no, our infrastructure has adjusted over the last couple decades." And and so how do you have that conversation of when times have changed, people need to develop a new superpower. But you've already kind of touched on it of like the Udemy courses of constantly developing yourself, that it shouldn't be a like one-time step. And I think that also goes for our leadership style and calling out our teammates as superpowers or what makes them great that we really appreciate that makes them invaluable to the organization. So, Kristy, David, Dan, this has been a really great pre-symposium panel. I feel like we covered a lot of ground in today's conversation. I've really enjoyed all of your thoughts and your perspectives in this pre-symposium panel. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I like to meet these three great leaders," come to the Executive Symposium in a couple days in Houston, Texas. We're hosting the event at Porsche of River Oaks. The topic is building a clear vision that drives execution. I'll post a link on how to RSVP in the comments of this video. But Kristy, David, Dan, thanks for being here. This was a great